Okay, so today we are going to be talking about men's mental health, specifically Black men's mental health. So some information about myself. My name is Patrice. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California and Texas. I have a private practice called Empire Counseling and Consultation that is in California, Texas, New York, and now Florida. I offer virtual sessions in Florida where I specialize in men's issues, anger management, anxiety, depression, minority mental health, and substance abuse issues. I am wrapping up my degree in clinical psychology as a psychologist, doctoral student. My apologies. I will be finishing a doctoral program in June of this year. I'm very, very passionate about mental health, specifically to men. For the past almost 4 years of my life, I have been working in a substance abuse agency where I am now a clinic director of, and during that time, I was working with the federal probation population, and my understanding and knowledge and compassion grew for men tremendously that it actually became my specialty. And so in my private practice, 70% of my practice is African American men. There are a few other races in my practice as far as Middle Eastern and Hispanic, but primarily it is African American men. And I address issues as far as life transition, putting a name to what's going on with them. A lot of men don't understand when they're going through something that it's something that they shouldn't have to experience. They think it's part of normal everyday life, and that's why they don't talk about it. So this presentation is very, very important to me, and I hope that the information I give to you will be helpful, that you can spread among your friends and family, as well as take it for yourself if you're here to get the information for yourself. Excuse me. So the learning objectives for this webinar today will be the signs of depression and hopelessness that aren't easily noticed, tips on how to communicate and support men during difficult times, and how to have the conversation about help and receiving treatment without offending them. So we're going to get right into depression, because depression is a really big focal point among men. There are a lot of scenarios where people think that men are just acting out or they're acting aggressive, but in a lot of ways it may be due to them experiencing depression or life changes, and they're not able to emotionally regulate that or express it, and so it inward towards turns into depression, and we're thinking that they're just having a moment, but it can be so much more than that. So when we talk about depression, I think majority of us know what depression may look like. It can look like insomnia, or sleeping too much. You're sad all the time. You're isolated. You have low energy. You're thinking about maybe you shouldn't be on this earth anymore. You may be overeating, emotionally eating, or not eating at all. But for men, it can be they're angry all of a sudden. If a man is snapping all of a sudden, excuse me, and you don't know where it's coming from, that's not his typical reaction to things. Something else is going on. If he's isolating more, he may be going through something. He may be tired, but there may be something going on that needs further discussion. His sex drive is low. His libido is low. He's having suicide ideation. He's increasing drinking, or he's getting more into marijuana or using other drugs. And even though I mentioned that they tend to isolate in the emotional regulation, sometimes they severely isolate to where they don't come home. There may be people may think that other things are going on, but they rather not go in the house because they don't want people to ask them what's going on, or they don't want their families to see that they're in pain, and so they rather just not come home, or they'll work extra hours at the office, or they'll take the long way home, or on the weekends say they're going fishing or whatever the case is, but they're really just getting away just to be by themselves. Those are telltale signs that something is going on with the man in your life, or if you're the man online, something's going on with you in life. So if you've been, a guest of the last few webinars, and if you've seen these online, I always bring these up because they're very helpful. But I have always discussed what the 6 signs of depression in Black men are. Of course, there are many other symptoms that can be related to depression. The DSM-5 has at least a whole page of symptoms that can be related to depression. But when we look at Black men, these are the most common. So this list is not exhausted, but these are very important signs that you must be aware of. So we have substance abuse, which we talked about. So they tend to drink alcohol more, and marijuana to cope or numb the pain, but they realize that when they wake up in the morning from their hangover or their high is worn off, that nothing has gotten settled, so therefore they're back to their depressed state. We also have sexual dysfunction, like we talked about. It may worsen if they've already had issues. Also, if they're on specific medications, that may play a role in their sexual dysfunction as well. Suicide thoughts. Men are 4 times likely to die by suicide, and 7 to 8 Black men die by suicide. So suicide thoughts, ideation, and completion are very, very, very heavy in Black men. So we always need to be mindful of what is going on with them. Anger. Men at most times manifest hostility, aggressiveness, and anger when depressed. It's more than irritability and can strike at the smallest things. So it can be that you ate their Cheetos. It's really not about the Cheetos, but they're so overwhelmed that the last thing they needed you to do was put your hand in their Cheeto bag or eat their last Cheeto. They also experience loss of focus. It may slow down a man's ability to process information, depression, thereby impairing concentration on work or other tasks. So loss of focus is a very, very big sign that something is going on. It could be anxiety as well, but it also could be depression. Increase in physical pain or chronic medical issues. A lot of times when men are depressed, they get severe headaches. If they're balancing anxiety and depression, heart palpitations. If they're getting angry all the time, heart palpitations. So when they're depressed, their body goes into overdrive, and so they're feeling a lot more symptoms in their body than they may be feeling in their head. So when we talk about depression, I want to acknowledge that there are different levels of depression for everybody. We know that it can be situational. We know it can be seasonal. It can be due to grief. It can be due to change in life. But one of the things that a lot of our men experience, especially if they come from neighborhoods where it wasn't the greatest times, and the goal was to get out of the hood. And if you got out of the hood, or your homies or your friends got out of the hood, that they had to put each other on and get out the hood as well. So when we look at it from that perspective, there is a large amount of our men that experience survivor's guilt. And as a therapist, I do want to disclose that this is not very commonly talked about amongst the mental health profession. The reason why that I've realized that it's becoming an issue is because, of course, like I said, I've worked with men, I hear their stories, but Kendrick Lamar, the hip-hop rapper, had mentioned that he often battles with depression because he has survivor's guilt. He was not able to get all his friends out of the hood, and so he feels guilty that he's out living his best life and his friends aren't. So when we look at it from that perspective, a lot of our men are experiencing this guilt. And the definition is experiencing a life-threatening situation and surviving when others didn't. So we can take it out of the hood. We can take it out of the man's perspective. This can be a car accident. This can be a major disaster that happened, and maybe 50 million people died and only 3 made it. Those people feel guilty. So some of the symptoms that you will see in survivor's guilt is having flashbacks, feeling irritable, having difficulty sleeping, feeling immobilized, numb, or disconnected, being unmotivated, feeling helpless, guilty for surviving the situation, and suicide ideation. So if you look at the signs of survivor's guilt, it actually has a mix of post-traumatic stress disorder and depression. So this is why I wanted to highlight survivor's guilt, because we could put a generic name on it instead of this depression, but it may be due to this. And so if we're continually watching the news and we're seeing, the police are hurting us. I just saw briefly clip, and I wish sometimes, once again, Instagram would be more mindful and warn us when content like this is put out there. But there was a young woman that got tackled by a security, or I think it was a police officer. I think he was in Miami, and the way that he tackled her was just so brutal. Now it's creating outrage, and so when we're continuously watching those things, or we're witnessing, different situations, we tend to feel depressed, we tend to get PTSD, and we may have survivor's guilt for making it and others don't. So this may be a cause to why you're a man in your life, or you may be experiencing depression. Another thing that I would like to highlight, now I'm not saying that eating disorders are caused by depression, or you will get an eating disorder if you have depression, but I do want to be mindful that when a man is feeling the signs of depression, he doesn't know what's going on. All he knows is that he has no control over his life. It seems like everybody's, making decisions for him. Life is making decisions for him. He doesn't have a say in what's going on, and so he feels very overwhelmed. So while he may be feeling depressed, he may be turning anxious as well. And so what happens in men is that they tend to develop eating disorders. And the biggest reason why they develop eating disorders is because that's the way that they can have some control in their life, is to control their weight and what they eat. And so while we always highlight eating disorders in communities outside African American or gender specific in men, it is very, very common for Black people to have eating disorders and men, especially Black men, to have eating disorders. So here are some of the symptoms and signs of an eating disorder. Excessive exercise, so they're exercising daily, often multiple times a day, not associated with athletic conditioning. So we're not talking about the athletes that have to train, or if you're going to the gym every day or you're trying to meet a goal. I'm not saying that you can't hit the gym in the morning and the evening. That's not where I'm coming from. I'm coming from the place of men or people in general going to the gym, spending 3 to 4 hours each time. They may go breakfast, lunch, and dinner. If they ate something that they weren't supposed to, or they're feeling guilty, they run to the gym. They're always trying to burn off these excessive fat or calories that they have in their mind, to the point where they're now obsessed with exercising. Fluctuation in weight, excessive dieting or fasting to control weight. So not eating, drinking water only, maybe only eating salads and only once a day, or really just having this portion control where it's non-existent. And at the end of the day, even if we are dieting or changing our lifestyle habits, we have to make a certain calorie intake for our bodies to function appropriately. So not eating, or eating small little items that don't account for any calories is not very helpful. Increased symptoms of anxiety, depression, so constant self-evaluation based on distorted perceptions of body size and shape. You may be seeing like a nice looking man that has a nice stomach and everything. He doesn't look too bad, but in the mirror he feels like a man that has a huge stomach and is bloated. And so a lot of times when we're feeling really bad about ourselves, our body perceptions change as well. And so if your man is starting to say, hey, I look fat, I don't like how I look disgusting, don't look at me, and he looks just fine, there may be something going on pertaining to his thoughts, as well as he may be experiencing an eating disorder. Drug use such as amphetamines or weight loss supplements to suppress appetite and or increase energy for weight loss. So yes, pre-workout has the same stimulants that mimic meth or amphetamine speed. And I know this because sometimes when my clients test, UA test, because they're in a drug program, they come out positive because their pre-workout had like a trace of what would look like amphetamines, but it comes out a false positive because it's pre-workout. So if you see them excessively taking that to increase their energy so that they can work out, or suppress their appetite, because meth does suppress your appetite and it gives you a boost of energy. So you can hit the gym for a lot longer, not burn out as much, and you don't have to eat. So you can keep your weight down, and you don't have to worry about fluctuating in weight. Also, what I didn't mention in this one, because it's not really talked about in men, but they use laxatives as well. So men will excessively use laxatives to quote unquote detox, or empty their bowels. So once again, they're not keeping weight. Usually eating unusually fast, past feeling full, so they could be binge eating. Large amounts of when they're not hungry, and or eating alone out of embarrassment, known as binge eating. So if they're eating alone, you notice that you see like different food bags in the garbage can, but they're not eating it in front of you, or they're eating really fast, or they're just eating to be eating. There may be some issues with binge eating, which we also know as emotional eating as well. So like I said, while it's not depression, an eating disorder can develop if they're experiencing depression, or they could be experiencing depression because they have an eating disorder. So just another perspective you can look at with men. So we're going to next talk about suicide ideation in Black men. So like I talked about, suicide is a really, really serious issue in the Black community when it pertains to men. Men have the highest rate of completed suicides. Women have a high rate of attempts. But a lot of times women aren't able, because they feel like they have a lot going on in their life. They have a lot of people, kids, family, depending on them, that's not the first thing that they go to. But for Black women, their physical health is what takes them out. So while a lot of Black women don't complete suicide, the heart attacks, the high blood pressure, the cholesterol issues, those are what we would consider our suicidal issues as far as death-wise, when it comes to not taking care of ourselves or overworking ourselves to the point where our body literally gives out. And so when we look at Black men and suicide, we do want to acknowledge that 80% of completed suicides by Black men are made by elderly Black men. And it's mostly due to not medications, but medical conditions that they see that it's hopeless, they're not going to get any better, and so they'd rather, die than suffer in silence. We also see depression, so PTSD and physical health issues are among the leading cause of suicide ideation. The top three mental illnesses in the Black community is PTSD, depression, and they always talk about ADHD in kids. But PTSD and depression are very high in our community. Firearms are the most common method of suicide for Black men. And it says here 6 to 7 men died by suicide, but it has gone up a little bit to 7 to 8 men. And Caribbean Black men living in the U.S. have the highest rate of suicide in the Black community. So when we look at suicide ideation, the first thing that everybody gets scared about and they want to talk about it is because if somebody's like, I wonder if it would just look like if I wasn't here anymore, or if somebody does acknowledge that they have been having thoughts of ending their life, the first thing that people think is like, well, if I help them and it doesn't work, then I failed them for not saving their life. One thing I will tell you about suicide ideation, suicides, is that most people don't want to die, but they want the pain to stop. And so when they're expressing to you that they're having these thoughts, it's because they know that it's not right. They know that's not how life is supposed to be. And so they're reaching out for help. By no means does that mean that it is your obligation to babysit them to make sure that they don't harm themselves. Or if they do decide to go through it, you do not have to feel guilty for not keeping them alive, but it is our responsibility as human beings in our community that if our community members are hurting and they are expressing things, that we get them the best help as possible. So I want to talk about hopelessness versus suicide ideation because sometimes they do get mixed up, and I do want to say that hopelessness is a very severe sign that it can turn into suicide ideation, but just to be mindful that hopelessness is always a sign that there's severe depression going on and there's just ruminating thoughts that things may not be getting better. I am a firm believer that all of us have experienced hopelessness at some point in time, so we can all relate and be understanding to people that are going through it. So what is hopelessness? A warning sign of suicide ideation, as we talked about, an attitude towards the future, feeling that things will never improve, and statements said such as, what do I have to look forward to? There's no point in trying anymore. Things will never get better. And you can feel hopeless and not suicidal. So those are the signs of something that is going on. You're not feeling like yourself. No matter what you do, you can't put that smile on your face. You can't see the sunshine through the rain clouds. And so everything around you just looks like you're a mess. And so if we stay in that type of mindset, it can turn into the other side of the slide, which is thinking of ways to end life, planning out a way to die, selling or giving away possessions, and discussing death and higher power increasingly or suddenly. And so if we don't address the hopelessness and talk about why do we feel so hopeless and what are some things that need to change for us to feel like we can get back to a stable level of functioning, we have to have the conversation and we need to go to therapy, because if not, it can turn into the thoughts of, well, since nobody cares and things are not getting better, then maybe my time on this earth should be done at this point. So we need to be very careful about the hopelessness and defining what hopelessness is versus what suicide ideation is. So, as I mentioned in my introduction, I am in my doctoral program at the Chicago School for Clinical Psychology to one day become a psychologist. And as many people know, to get your doctorate, you have to do a dissertation. So I am in the brutal phase of finishing up my dissertation. But my dissertation was on the barriers to mental health treatment for African American men. And so this slide is a little bit of information from what I pulled from my research when it pertains to men and why they're having a difficult time getting to a therapist, and what are some things that we can do to help inspire them to get into mental health treatment. So the first thing that they talked about, and every single one of my participants brought it up, was eliminating the stigmas. There is still really big stigmas out there that if men go to therapy, that they're gay. The homosexuality conversation comes up frequently still. You know, I was very surprised that that was the number one answer when it came to why are men not seeking mental health treatment, is that a lot of them are in fear of being considered gay. And so in order for us to push the narrative for that therapies for everybody, we have to remove that you are not gay if you go to therapy. And if you are gay, it's still okay to go to therapy. And I think that the whole piece of the homosexuality piece that comes with the stigma is that men are not allowed to have emotions. And so when men are in tune, they look at it as a sensitive woman type feature. And so somehow, some way that correlates into being gay, which is far from the truth. Religion, a lot of men feel guilty that they can't seem to get their lives together after talking to God or going to church or taking it to the altar. And so if they go to therapy, they're saying that God can't help them and that God can't trust them. And these ideations come from, you know, generations of our family members telling us these things. But that's a really big reason as to why they don't seek mental health treatment, is because they're supposed to rely on God to get them through everything, when God actually put therapists in place to help. I mean, in the Bible, a lot of people were experiencing mental health issues. It's a Western concept to say that it's a mental health issue, but there was many people that dealt with anger issues, anxiety, depression, suicide, ideation, I mean, you name it. And they had wise counsel, which was God-appointed people that would help them get through their issues. So in a sense, that's what therapists do now. I'm not saying that all of us are God appointed, but he did put us in places like medical doctors to help. Masculinity issues. So like, it goes back to the whole feminine thing that why can't you figure it out on your own? It's a woman trait to go to therapy and talk about your problems. As a man, you got to figure it out for not only yourself, but the whole world, because the whole world depends on you. So if you go sit on somebody's couch and talk to them about your issues, all of a sudden your masculinity is up in the air. That is so unfair, in my opinion, and I think that it would be really helpful if we could, you know, take that stigma off the table so we can get these men on these couches to talk about their issues. Emotional regulation. Men are not supposed to have feelings. They ain't supposed to cry. All they're supposed to be, according to most people, is they're supposed to be angry and pound on their chest and make things happen. But with the recent trends that have happened in, you know, our community, with Kobe Bryant passing away very suddenly, Pop Smoke, you name it, it has allowed men, or I would say has forced men, to become more in tune with their emotions and cry, because it is a very, very somber time to deal with the death of anybody and somebody that you were inspired by, felt very close to. And so the time of Kobe Bryant's passing, a lot of NBA players, a lot of men consoled each other and cried and talked about how they felt. I think that opened up so much more conversation, and it has decreased the stigma of emotional regulation when it comes to Black men, but we continuously need to cut that stigma out. They also said that we need to create more programs and awareness, especially catered to Black men. A huge part of my research was to state that, to my knowledge, there really is not a program in the United States that is just specific to Black men and mental health. We have Black maternal health, we have Hispanic mental health. We have just regular, mental health for, whites. But we don't have anything for Black men. And considering all, different things are coming up that they are suffering at all-time high numbers of untreated mental illnesses, more programs, awarenesses, flyers that look like them, talk their language, those things need to be created for Black men. And that's why throughout my PowerPoint, you'll see that I made a lot of infographics that have Black men on it. They need to see so that they can identify that, hey, that looks like me. This may be me too. Increasing knowledge about the benefits of therapy, not necessarily focusing on the symptoms. So a lot of men do not identify with depression, anxiety, or mood disorders because they don't identify with the symptoms. And so instead of focusing on giving them a checklist of what these things look like, we have to talk about that therapy is not just for mental disorders. A lot of people and men still believe that, oh, if I go to therapy, that means I'm crazy. I'm sitting on a shrink couch and they're going to get into my head because I'm crazy. Therapy can be used for so many things. Therapy can be used for relationship issues, life changes, just talking and processing and figuring out where's the next phase in life. It can be used if you have a severe mental illness, but there's a lot of people that use therapy to just make sure that their life is continuously being the best that it can. You don't always have to have an issue to go to therapy, but we do have to break that stigma that in order for you to see a therapist, you have to have a severe mental illness. So if we talk to men about the different layers of therapists, what they're able to do, even life coaches, I think that it will expand the conversation and there will be a lot more motivation to seek mental health treatment or therapists. And more conversations about men and mental health from peers. A lot of men express that they would like to hear more stories from, their brothers or their friends about, therapy and what it's done for them and how it's helping them and the ups and downs of what they're experiencing. A lot of them feel like when it comes to conversations regarding, mental health, a lot of them, shy away from it, or they act like they're cool, they're fine, but they don't get to hear about, the struggle until they're finally over it and they're not experiencing it and they can talk about it like a testimony. A lot of men felt like if more men among their circles, or they would hear about it more on social media or TV or movies, that it will, motivate them to seek treatment as well. On a side note to that, I felt like it was very funny and weird to hear that statement because my dissertation was focused on focus groups where I was going to ask a series of questions and I wanted the men to have a conversation. Most of the men had a problem with talking about mental health among the circle, and so I had to change my dissertation to individual interviews. And so when the majority of them said that, I was like, well, I tried to do that for y'all and y'all didn't want it. So I thought it was very funny that was the main solution to how to increase mental health treatment for men, but yet majority of them didn't want to do that. So those are ways that we can increase mental health treatment for men. So when it comes to talking about mental health and concerns with men, we have to be very careful about what we say because they will set the whole room off if we're left with anything. So these are some tips on what to do and what not to do when discussing concerns. So when you want to open up the conversation or check on, a man in your life, how are you feeling today? We want to really try to have open-ended questions where it's not yes or no, because you're going to start asking more questions. They're going to get annoyed, or you're going to get annoyed at the fact you got to keep asking a million questions just to get the answer to one question. So try to ask open-ended questions. How are you feeling today? I noticed you haven't been yourself. What can I do to help? Instead of saying, are you okay? Yeah, I'm okay. That's not enough. So what can I do to help? They got to think, they got to open their mouth, and they got to talk. I'm here for you whenever you want to talk. That's not really a question. It's just a statement. A lot of men, they need time to process what they're dealing with, what they're thinking. Sometimes they need to take a minute to really absorb what's going on with them before they're able to express it to someone that they trust. So if we just be that supportive, like, I'm here for you whenever you want to talk. If you keep saying that, at some point they're going to talk to you. They just need to know that it's a safe space and that they're going to be okay to talk to you. Give a hug or kiss randomly if it fits your situation. So please don't, especially in this state, please don't just go kissing random people. But if you're in a situation where you are very close to this man in your life, sometimes just giving that physical affection, that physical touch is something that can really open up the conversation and break the barrier of having a conversation that something is going wrong and they need support. So when it comes to men, please don't just do this one time and think it's going to work. You may have to do it 20 times. Repeat, 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 repeat. If you know something is going on, don't rush the process. Just keep putting the do's out there until they're ready to talk about it. Okay, so here's the don'ts. Please don't tell them to man up. Lord, please don't tell them to man up. Do you guys even know what man up is? When I asked, there's so many different definitions of man up. It should just be eliminated in general. But the last thing that a man needs to hear when he's feeling vulnerable or something is going on is to man up, because he's already had that conversation with himself 50 billion times before you said it. So please, please, please do not tell a man to man up. Please don't tell them to stop being emotional, because that's what women do. They're human beings too. We're all emotional, so they have feelings too, and they should be able to express it. Please don't say what you have to be depressed about. I do everything around here. That comes up a lot when it comes to couples cohabitating or they're married. What do you have to be depressed about? I cook, I clean, I take care of the kids, I take care of the household. All you do is go work and pay bills. I wish I had that life. That's the last thing that somebody wants to hear when they're going through something and are actually telling you about it. So please refrain from having those type of phrases when talking to your man or friend. We both can't be emotional. That's my job. Yes, you both can be emotional. Yes, sometimes one of us has to be the bigger person and put our emotions to the side just for a minute so that we can get back to a stability amongst each other. But both of y'all are capable and should be okay to be emotional. So please do not put that in the woman category. That goes back to why men feel like, having depression or talking about their feelings is a gay trait, because of statements like that. Men get things done. Life can be worse. That's the last thing we also need, is that reminding men that their job on this earth only is to help us procreate, make the money, and take care of the household. There's so much more to men than that, but when we make statements like that, it avoids them being a human being, and it creates more depression in them. So I did create this infographic as well. It's phrased to avoid saying to someone with anxiety or depression. These are ones that can be used for everybody, so that's why I included it in this PowerPoint. So if some of the things that I mentioned in the previous one, you're like, I need a little bit more than that, then these are things that you can avoid saying and things that you can say instead. Okay, so let's talk about some tips on having a conversation about therapy. Please do not say you need a therapist as it's a punishment. A lot of people, this is not just for men, but for some reason we have made it seem like saying that you need a therapist is a bad thing, or that because you're so screwed up in a sense that you need a therapist. So when somebody says you need a therapist, sometimes it's not coming from the best place. Therefore, it creates that stigma of what's therapy and how therapy can be beneficial. So please don't yell like you need a therapist. That's not going to help anything. Put the man on edge and on guard. It's going to be a whole conversation that's unnecessary. Don't say something is wrong with you, you need to talk to someone. That's the last thing that we should be saying. How do we know something's wrong with him, and how do we define something's wrong with him? So we got to be very careful about how we say things to get the men engaged in the conversation. Whatever your therapist is doing, it ain't working. There are men that are going to therapy, and therapy is a process. It's not an overnight success story. It's not going to change you overnight. You may be doing well, and you may revert back to old behaviors. The last thing that anybody wants to hear is that whatever your therapist is doing is not working. So please, please, please be mindful of the negative comments that you make about the conversations about therapy and what therapy is about. You can do or say, I notice you haven't been yourself, and I don't think I can help with this. How do you feel about talking to someone? So that's one thing that, even though it sounds weird saying, it does open up the conversation of like, hey, I'm here to support you. I'm rocking with you 1,000, but I know as your friend, as your partner, as your confidant, as your wife, as your husband, that there are just some things that I just can't help you with. Maybe it'd be helpful if somebody else that, isn't so close to you can help you. If we take it from that perspective, men are a little bit more likely to put their guard down and consider it more than you saying you need to go talk to someone because something's wrong with you. I know you have been struggling and I want to support. Would it be better if I went to therapy with you? So one of the things that came up in my dissertation was that men are more likely to go to couples therapy because it's a us issue and not a me issue than go by themselves. And so I'm not saying that we have to go to couples therapy for the man to get support, but sometimes as a human being, people are afraid to go to therapy. And so if we offer to go with them and that'll make them feel better, why not? As I was going to school to become a therapist, there was many of my friends where I said, I'll go sit with you in your first couple of sessions so you can get comfortable and you know that you're not in this alone. Some of those friends are still in therapy today because those 2 steps of having somebody familiar in the room and seeing that therapy is actually not a bad place to be help them absorb and really work on themselves and stay in therapy. So if you feel comfortable asking this question and they want you to go to therapy with them, just to help them get situated, why not? I think it's a great idea. Another thing you can say is a lot has been going on in life and it may help you feel better to talk to someone that isn't me. A lot of times we are very afraid to be our most vulnerable with the people around us because they may throw it back in our face. We may feel like they don't understand, or we want to appear stronger than we are. And so sometimes saying like, hey, maybe it'll be better if you talk to someone that's not so close to you. They'll see that like, dang, like they see something's going on with me. I'm not ready to have that conversation with them. So maybe it is time for me to go talk to someone else. So these are a few tips that you can implement when having conversations about therapy for men. So some coping skills for men. A lot of men, like I said, they're not ready to take the therapy route. That's fine. Or maybe they don't have the funds to go to therapy, or insurance isn't covering it, or whatever the case may be. Even though we go to therapy, there are always things that we need to do outside therapy to keep the momentum going, to keep the healthy state of emotional well-being. And so here are some coping skills that I recommend for men that they can use in or out of therapy. So meditation is very, very important. There are several free apps in the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. I'm sorry, I'm an Android fan, guys, don't hate on me. Where you can get free apps for meditation. A lot of people like the Calm app. The Calm app is essentially a paid app, so they do have free things on there, but it's so limited you get frustrated and you end up wanting to pay. If there are any therapists, or I think it's medical or mental health professionals on this webinar, you can actually reach out to Calm, and they give all, I think it's medical and mental health professionals, a year free subscription to Calm. And so LeBron has his series on there. Matthew McConaughey has his series on there. So it's very cool, where it helps you not only meditating, but guided imagery for sleeping and things like that. So that is one good app, but there are several free guided meditation apps that are out there that are great for men. Podcasts out there that are really instrumental in helping Black men. One of them is Let's Talk Bruh. I know that they have an Instagram page that you can look that up. There is also I think Mental Health Matters. I found them on Twitter. They talk a lot about masculinity issues. Sometimes your favorite podcast, like the Joe Budden podcast, which I think is a hilarious podcast, a lot of times they address different mental issues going on. So podcasts may be a good coping skill for men to understand their emotional problems and how to get through some things. Journaling is one of the safest ways to really be vulnerable without judgment. And so a lot of men, whether it's on a piece of paper, in a notebook, to their phone, they're jotting down in their notes section. Journaling and getting the thoughts out is very, very important, so they're not ruminating and making them anxious. Coloring is a thing that's been happening over the last few years, where we have adult coloring books that are specifically designed to help with anxiety or depressive symptoms. And so excuse me, there is a therapist. His name is Rashawn. I think he's in North Carolina. He goes around sometimes throughout the country or in his hometown. He does adult coloring workshops where men or women just get together and they just color. This is a very good exercise to do because you get the coloring book. You can have it at your desk, at work. You can have it in the car, at school. And anytime you're feeling overwhelmed, you can just color to soothe yourself. So that's a very good tool. Yoga. A lot of men are getting into yoga. There's a lot of male yoga instructors that are going around the country and encouraging men to do yoga. So yoga is a very great technique for the physical and mental health aspect. And guy time. A lot of guys would just love to talk to their guys about what's going on. They want to talk about their issues, but not always have to put marijuana with it or alcohol with it, or have to beat around the bush and make it appear that things are better than they are. And so a lot of men like being around their men and just kicking it and just talking about it and just vibing out. And so a lot of men wish there was more guy time amongst the brothers. So here are some resources for men that need help find a therapist. The Therapy for Black Girls directory. There's most of the providers on there, I believe, are women. So a lot of men feel more comfortable talking to a woman than a man. So if you're looking for a female therapist of color, you go to Therapy for Black Girls. There is a Therapy for Black Men directory. You have Melanin and Mental Health directory. You have Open Path, which is a database where you can find a therapist in your area or online that provides sliding scale fee therapy sessions. So I think the highest session fee is like $60 a session. So if you're having a difficult time finding someone that can fit your budget, you want to check out Open Path. You also have Psychology Today, which is the #1 search engine for all mental health professionals. So if you're looking for a specific person to treat ADHD or bipolar disorder or divorce issues, and you have a specific insurance you want to use, you can filter out different providers in your area that will be helpful for you in those areas. You cannot search by race, and so you just gotta scroll through the site to find a person of color if that's what you're interested in, but the other databases are specifically for people of color. And then you have My True Circle, which is an online platform that therapists use to provide online therapy, but they also have a database of therapists that offer online therapy. What I will say about this resource list, and I talk about this in any presentation that I give, is that we are in areas where there are not a lot of Black therapists, and so that does hinder us from getting help. My recommendation is to be open-minded to online therapy. When it comes to online therapy, the therapist only has to be licensed in that state. So if your nearest Black therapist is 15 miles away, you're not going to go 50 miles every week to go see this therapist, but you may get on that computer and talk to them. And so that just expands the reach of a person of color as your therapist if you're more inclined to be more receptive to online therapy. So if you're having a difficult time finding a Black therapist or a therapist of color, explore the option of online therapy. And I bet you any money you will find a lot more options than trying to look in your local area. So that is the end of my presentation. If you are interested in keeping up in the things that I am doing, please feel free to follow me on Instagram at Patrice Nicole. Facebook and Twitter is at Patrice N. Douglas. You are free to email me or visit my website. My empirecounseling.net is for my practice. And so if you're in California, Texas, New York, or now Florida, you can book a session. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me on any of those platforms, and I am open to questions.
And so we'll take questions. Also, just really quick, I sent, if you look in the chat, a link. If you all could please, it's just a quick, it says 2-minute survey. I don't even think it takes that long. We'd love to have your feedback on the webinar or any comments that would allow us to continue to expand upon our topics. And if you have any questions, you can either type it in the chat or use the question and answer function.
Please feel free to ask any questions.
And I'll read them and they'll be anonymous if that makes it easier for you all. Let's see if there's... So I don't see the link in the chat. It's at the very, I just resent the link. Hopefully you can see it. And your chat box should be, I'm assuming on yours it's the corner right panel. It may be different with me as an administrator. She said, yes, she doesn't see it. I don't know why. Patrice, where's your chat panel? Because mine is to the far right side.
So is mine. I don't know if it's because like I'm a shared administrator, but when I open up the chat box, it literally has the link on there. So I'm not sure as to why she can't see it, but she's in the chat. Let me see. If I can.
I'll email it if that makes it easier also for those of you who can't see it. If you have a question and you don't see the chat and you want to raise your hand, that's fine as well, and then I can read it. Okay, we may not have any questions. Well, I will, so let me just. So I guess we will quickly, we'll just end it if there's no questions or comments. I want to just first of all just reiterate for those of you that joined us a little later into the presentation. We are, this is the final part of a three-part webinar series. Of this three-part webinar series, I think that it was a great idea. We started holding these conversations to be able to reduce the stigma around mental health, and our topics are very, very important to our community. We have partnered with Patrice in an effort to have a conversation that is not necessarily so technical for just providers, but it's also important that our community hears these conversations. So at the beginning, we had said we were going to make the presentations available online right after them, but we actually are just going to release them now on social media and websites. So anyone who's participated in the webinars will receive links to all the series as we roll out, and we'll also be sharing them on social media. But also want to remind everyone to please complete the census. It is very important to our communities that we complete the census for everyone in our community, whether they are here as citizens or not. Just final comment, there are no citizenship questions or any ask of Social Security. Please be sure to include children. Children under the age of 5 has been the most undocumented and recorded, and our children need preschool and schools in their community. And I just want to thank Patrice again. We hope that you will complete our survey so that we can continue to build upon this webinar series. Thank you very much. And at this time, we hope everyone stays safe and healthy. Patrice?
Yes, thank you everybody for participating. If you didn't feel comfortable asking a question in this webinar, feel free to send me a direct message on any of the platforms I mentioned, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions.
Okay.
Take care, everybody.